Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today. Because today we're dabbling more into the sci-fi, we're talking about the latest blockbuster release. This is a movie that we were preparing through our read-through of Dune, the book, because, just yesterday we attended a screening, or at least I watched yesterday. Did you watch on opening day?
I watched yesterday, yeah.
Okay, so yesterday we watched Dune Part 2 in the theaters, and now here we are today to talk about it and compare it to the books and all that good stuff. We're here.
Yeah, I mean, Charles, I'm so glad that after you pitched the book and Friends Pitching Fantasy that I chose it and that we read the book before seeing the movie. It gave such awesome context, and I recommend anyone who hasn't watched the movie yet, you give that book a very quick read so you can get to the theater while Dune is still in there. It was so good, Charles. So amazing. I just have to start with that. I'm not going to be coy about this whole thing. I absolutely love the movie. I'm so excited to get into the deep depths of discussing this with
you. Dude, I was super entertained. One, just like visually, and the sound was just the movie going experience was incredible. And two, you touched on it, like we just read the book, and I mean, thank you for acknowledging my brilliant idea to read Dune right before the movie came out.
I mostly acknowledged my brilliant idea to select it, actually.
It wouldn't have been possible without me. It was my idea. Like, it's plans within plans, right? I knew you were going to pick it and that all this stuff would happen, right? So, anyway, it was a brilliant idea because I got so much enjoyment out of trying to figure out, or just seeing what the director was doing differently with the story and what he kept the same, and it wasn't kind of what I expected, and I really enjoyed that. Like, he stuck true to a lot of the source material, and the ways in which he differed, like thematically and with his character development, it really made it appropriate for a modern audience, and so much more nuanced, and honestly just better than what we got in the book, in my opinion, which I know can be a controversial take, but we'll get into that in our spoiler-filled moments, which we'll announce very soon. We won't dabble too long in the spoiler-free, but just didn't want to drop with end of the book, end of a second part of a movie spoilers before we at least give you a fair warning.
That's a good point to clarify, Charles, for anyone years in the future, because we know people go deep back into the catalog. We just saw Dune Part 2. Dune Part 1 was out years ago, 2021, I believe, and now we're in the year 2024. And it was, really cool to get to see. The first one was only released straight to... Was it HBO Max at the time?
It was. I think it was both. I think it was also a theatrical release, but it was also controversially straight to streaming. It was a time when theaters were either just reopening or still closed. I don't fully remember. I remember having people over and watching it at my house and being like, "I'm never going to the theater again. This is awesome." But I did catch this one in the theater, and I had a great movie-going experience, which I wasn't fully prepared for. It was really good.
Yeah. I mean, just to echo what you were saying earlier, Charles, while we're still in the spoiler-free shallows, I'll say that visual feast, right? That feels super cliche. How many reviews can you find on Rotten Tomatoes where the phrase visual feast comes up? Probably quite a few, but it does feel like that's a super appropriate way to describe it. Sounded great. There were parts where it literally felt great, where I saw it in XD. The theater was shaking. Charles, you said you saw it in Dolby, which is in Dolby next theater, level, baby. I think.
It was awesome. Yeah. It's worth the money for this movie, guys. But no, it was. It looked amazing. And the balance between the realistic sci-fi look and then the stylistic look, the way that they would go back and forth between the two was awesome. Like in those first scenes where they're using like the gravity jetpack things and they're kind of like wobbly as they go up and down. It looked awesome, like so good. And the sense of scale looked like really incredible. Like as someone who watches like sci-fi movies, it can be hard when there's so much technology of like to show space travel and stuff without having a huge budget, right? It's either like a CGI mess or like really contained. But in this, it was just a super ambitious, both in budget and in like visual effects. You would get those really cool on location practical effects. You'd get some really awesome CGI moments as well. I mean, it looked incredible. And then you would get like to the Harkonnen planet and it's all black and white and there's these creepy looking guys just in the background and everyone looks the same and you're like, this is like a nightmare right now. I'm like freaking out. It's just like the between the two is just so good, you know. And like you said, there's scenes where they're riding the sandworms and it's just like the whole theater is vibrating. You feel it in your chest from the bass, like so good. And in a way that, you know, I saw Avatar 2 in the theater, right? And that movie looked amazing, but you know, I walked away from it kind of expecting that, and I was like, it was very good. This was like next level. I was like, wow, I felt the presentation of that movie, which it hasn't happened for me in a while in my movie theater going experience.
Well said, Charles. Totally agree. It was so much fun to catch us in theaters, and I highly recommend that anyone who can make their way out there before this this probably very long run of theater showings of Dune, get in there and
get in there.
Yeah, I'll say too, you already mentioned this, the modifications made to the movie, which were actually a relatively small number, because it was super faithful in maybe 95 to even more % of the book. But I'll say the 5% that was changed was done masterfully, was adapted in a way that makes so much sense for a modern audience, that cut a lot of the stuff that when we read the book, we were like, dude, I don't know if they need to have this at all.
They're not going to do this, right? There's no way.
Those things were generally left out, and to great effect. I was very impressed. Like, you think of times where, not to attack Benioff and Weiss, they've become such easy targets of Game of Thrones showrunners, but there were times where, especially in the later seasons, they would make a change and be like, what? Like, why did you do that? And like, it's so confusing. And this was the opposite of that experience. It was like, yes, thank you for altering that part into this part. We thought they had their work cut out for them with the second part of the movie, because we felt like that was actually the weaker part of the book. And I will say, in the movies, the second part was the stronger of the two. So that's about the biggest praise I think I can give this.
Yeah, well said. And like, I'll say this, like, this is one of those rare moments where the sequel's better than the original, where the adaptation's better than the original. Like, that just goes to show you that, you know, when I heard that Denis Villeneuve was going to do this, the guy who made Arrival, you know, one of our favorite sci-fi movies ever, it's like, this guy just understands the art of adaptation, right? It's like totally new medium, totally new audience. And the way he was able to edit out like B and C level plot lines from the books to keep the movie going. And this movie goes, right? Even though it's 2 hours and almost 40 minutes long, like it moves fast, and it does not really dwell on plot intrigue as much as the books do, right? It just rams you through it so that you can get character moments and action scenes and things like that. And the amount of characters it chooses to cut is perfect. And where it chooses to focus is excellent as well. And just also the shift in the focus on the main themes. It's a subtle shift, but it works with the material so well. And it works for modern audiences so well. And it works for the ending really well, which we, as you mentioned, Dylan, we were questioning how the ending of the book was going to be presented in
like,
the movies.
No way
there's no way it
route.
ends this way. It's physically impossible. And the changes were so subtle and done with such a deft hand that it was not where I would have thought he was going to go. I thought it was going to be a little more heavy-handed or something, but it really was excellent. And I think we should not wait anymore, and we need to get right into the spoilers so we can get into this, because I think this is where the really interesting conversations are to be had.
Yeah, so this will be a spoiler-filled conversation of the Dune movies, and it is something that we meant to come in and discuss the movies as a whole, as a unit, part 1 and part 2. I have a feeling that this will be part 2 heavy, but there'll be some discussion of part 1 stuff as well. So if you don't want to get that spoiled, we're also going to talk about some of the modifications that were made from book to movie. Like we said, they're relatively small number, but to me that's such a juicy area to discuss because of those thematic changes that do take place, and because of just the brilliance of what was chosen to be cut or truncated or what have you. So that's what we'll be getting into. If that's not your jam for whatever reason, then now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones. And Charles, let's get into it. There's so much to discuss.
Let's get into it, man. I don't even know where to start. The movie was like so rich with these subtle differences. I think we just got to start with like the characters, right? The first one, obviously, I mean, Dylan, it was your favorite thing to talk about was Zendaya staring into the camera all of book 1. I think it's safe to say you got some redemption here in book 2, right? As someone who was, very interested in the Zendaya arc in book 1, why don't we start there?
Yeah, so let me just say, I rewatched Dune Part 1, and as a prelude to this, and make sure that I'm entirely ready for part 2. And I recommend anyone who gets a chance to do that as well. I was so on point with the Zendaya just stares at the camera in part 1. Like, it'd been years since I watched it. So I was like, is that overblown? Because I keep talking about this in the book and in the episode we did on the book. And no, that was 100% accurate. Actually, it would be a probably somewhat dangerous drinking game if you did like a shot for every every Zendaya just stares at the camera. Like, you're probably doing like 8 or 9 shots, and she's only in that movie for 7 minutes, that first movie.
Wow.
And if you watch it, it's actually not shocking. It's shocking when you just stop and think about that idea and the fact that she got paid $300,000 for that 7 minutes. But
good money. Honestly, she probably drew way more butts into seats, than $300,000 worth. That's a steal.
100% worth it. 100%.
She better have gotten points on the back end for Dune Part 2. I'm sure she got paid.
Oh, yeah. Part 2, who knows how much she made. I mean, probably you could look that up somewhere. But anyway, point being, yeah, she is extremely central to Part 2. Zendaya does an amazing job in that role, bringing so much more depth to a character that in the books we talked about how one-dimensional and shallow a character Chani was, and then not only does Zendaya bring so much life and personality to that character, such amazing casting, but also the role that they end up shifting her toward playing in the movie, where in the movie she is, despite being Paul's lover, and that's probably the best word for it in this, as opposed to the book where it ends up being more concubine. But in the movie, it's more she is Paul's lover and like partner, like equivalent of girlfriend, whatever word you want to use. But she is actually completely against the idea of Paul as this Messiah figure. And she rallies against it verbally, not just before she gets together with Paul, but during and, eventually we're in spoiler territory, like after, she is totally against that idea, and this idea of this kind of white savior equivalent coming in and being like, now I am your leader and your prophet. And she's like, no, that has to come from within our people here. And she, in the book, she's just like all Paul,
such a
all
passive
the time. Like,
character,
I 100%
like, oh, whatever
support.
you say, Paul, I'll be your wife, I'll be your, concubine, like whatever. And it was kind of disappointing. It's like, there's no way Zendaya would play this role, like the role that's in the books. There's just no way. And I agree, Dylan, it was so well done because, like you said, this book was written in the 50s, right? It was totally like a white savior chosen one thing, which, you're writing this book, you're presenting this movie in 2024. People will pick that apart in 2 seconds, So what they've done, which I thought was really clever, is they like upped the role of Chani, Zendaya's character, and they kind of upgraded the role of Stilgar as well. Yeah, and the two play off of each other in really interesting ways, and the theme switches more from like, oh, like I'm the chosen one. I'm going to come and save you guys. This is all about how, greed is bad and the people are good. And I'm going to show the people how to be good against the bad guy. You're like, okay, that's a bit kind of surface level and lame. And then what happens in this movie is like, no, this movie is about something way, way more. It's about using like how religion and faith can be both a motivator and a tool for manipulation, and learning how to like make a distinction between the two, and sometimes it can be hard to tell, and it was really interesting to watch the dynamic of that and the depth in which this movie chooses to go into that, where the book barely touches it. I mean, the whole premise of the book is that this chosen one messiah religion like was supplanted as a tool for manipulation, but it's just kind of like, yeah, that was a thing that we had set up as the Bene Gesserit, and it worked, and well done, team. And then Paul Atreides is like, ooh, I have to be this because I have to lead the people. But in this movie, it becomes a lot more problematic, and you have Zendaya, who's like the younger new school, who's like, guys, this is so obviously like a plant, a tool to control us. We're not going to be free if we believe that this person is a prophet. And then you have Stilgar, who, very charismatic, takes on this like comedy relief kind of role, which he was very funny. Javier Bardem gives a fantastic performance and brings life to this character that just did not exist in the books. And but also he plays this very radical fundamentalist role too, where he just firmly believes in the religion. So you have these like two like old school, new school terms of thought, which very popular in today's political world of fundamentalism versus like younger generations and clashing together. And here's Paul at the center of it with nothing but good intentions, but the fact that he's even there, he can't get out of his own way. And then there's the theme of, okay, like can an outsider come into a society, and can they actually become a member of that society? That's something like with immigration that we deal with all the time. It's like, hey, can someone who's from another culture and region come in and adopt themselves? Or are they never going to be a part of us? How do you blur that line too? And they come together super well in this. Brilliant.
Yeah. So you mentioned Stilgar and Chani's character that go from just these two, both of them in the book are just subsidiary to Paul. Like, Paul is the leader and they just serve him, and Chani is kind of more just like his lover who supports him in that way, and she does fight a little bit off screen in the book. And then Stilgar is more of his right hand man and the more militaristic aspects of things, and instead they get placed as kind of the angel and the devil on his shoulder. And even though Stilgar is a likable guy and well-meaning, I think in every respect, he is the devil, I think, in this case, on the shoulder, like whispering, not as like maniacally as it sounds, but he is promoting the idea of like Paul as this like prophet figure. And and then you've got Zendaya's character on the other side being like, dude, no, like, just, like, you can be a part of us trying to take back what's ours and fend off these people, but that's it. And I will say, Dune, the book, has hints of this, like, Paul, you're going down a questionable route, and your dad used to care about all these things and the people, and you're showing a little bit more of this, like, Machiavellianism, but it's so, like, understated to the point of almost not driving that point home, at least in the first book. I don't know, maybe it gets more into that in the later books, but the movie, as the Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, and I would be absolutely shocked if there's not a Part 3 or whatever.
Definitely is, and I wasn't expecting that either, which we'll get into that when we talk about the ending.
Yeah, but it is an incredible shift, and I absolutely adore that aspect of it. It made it so much more complex.
Yes, and the change in themes really put gas on the story, you know, because there's this, you know, chosen one, good defeats evil, yeah. But then it's like, oh, wow, like, is he really going to claim to be a messiah as a way to gain power and, like, end up essentially breaking up with Zendaya? Like, wow, like that's a hard choice to break up with Zendaya. A brutal choice to have to make for power, you know. And it, like, the ending, it sums up really well with Christopher Walken, who was a very interesting casting choice. I could not separate Christopher Walken,
especially after the Super Bowl commercials. I just kept thinking, like, it's the real deal.
I'm the emperor.
I know. That was me, an interesting choice for sure. Yeah.
And where he goes, you can't lead with your heart, you know, when he's talking about Paul's dad, Duke Leto, is just like, he was a weak man. You can't lead with the heart. It's impossible. And that's kind of the overarching, what I'm seeing across all of these movies is Timothée Chalamet, Paul Atreides, going to be able to, like, have a loving, meaningful relationship and also be the leader of an empire at the same time? Like, can you have both? And right now, the way this movie ends, it's like just very questionable. It does not work out. You know, it gets really messy. Because you think, you know, we knew how the books ended. We had this whole talk. And I think we may as well just get into it about, it's like, dude, there's no way this movie ends where Paul Atreides is, okay, Florence Pugh, you're going to be my wife. And then Zendaya, you're also going to be my wife. But don't worry, Zendaya.
No, like, Zendaya's going to be not just
Florence Pugh, wife, like I love you.
Going to be concubine. In the book, it would
wife
be
in name only.
Well, no, not even in name. She's not like it's
no,
like
the princess was wife in name only. Yeah.
Oh yes. So it's like the princess is going to be like, well, I hope she likes her books because and her writing.
She's never getting any.
Yeah, which then there's this kind of sense that we had afterwards where it's like, okay, well, Paul might be saying that now, but what about producing heirs? What about, you know, all this? And what about just the fact that who knows what happens when you're with the princess who's described as very attractive in the books and all this kind of stuff? So then you have Chani in the book just be like, all right, I'm happy to be the side piece here. Like, just don't make me a wife too. Like, this is all cool. And it literally ends with Paul's mom being like, well, like, history will remember us as the wives. That's the last word is wives. Like, it is so, like, weird and like doesn't translate to a modern audience where it's like, why would Chani or Zendaya agree with this? And we're like, what? Okay, so what route are they going to go here? And it is interesting, you touched on it, which is it basically comes down to, hey, Paul, are you choosing power by nature of getting together with this like Emperor's daughter, who also they did a great job of delivering more agency to her.
Yes. I don't know how they managed to weave in a plot for her, like character work into her, but they did it somehow.
Well done. Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. But they end up being like, do you choose power by being with this woman you don't know, but it gives you a better claim to the throne? Or do you choose love when it comes to Chani, and you don't get to have both like you did in the books.
Yes.
And it's like in here it's so much more interesting, and he chooses power. Like he does this like, just I want you to know that I'll always love you, Zendaya.
How many times have we heard that? Am I right, ladies?
Right. And then he turns around and he's like, okay, I want to marry your daughter. And instead of just, okay, I'm great with this, says Chani, it's like, what the, like, I'll keep it clean
off.
For the podcast.
Yeah, she doesn't.
She's like, what the heck? A little stronger than that. Dog? Yeah. What the frick? She is like, dude, that is horrible, both from the perspective of you seizing power and completely embracing all this despot nonsense and profit stuff. But it's also horrible from the fact that, like, dude, like, I thought we had a good thing going here. Like,
yeah, and their whole relationship was
yeah,
built off of him rejecting the Messiah title and rejecting power and just legitimately trying to learn to be Fremen and all of those things, which Timothée Chalamet's character, Paul Atreides, had this dark streak the whole time. Like, when he talks to his mom, Jessica, on the side, it's like, oh, they need to believe in me. I need to be one of them. I'm like, whoa, that's like a conniving thing to say, like in private, you know? It's like your most evil private thoughts. And then now he's like, oh, I'll always love you, but I need to marry the princess now, and I will not accept anything other than your agreement. You know, it's pretty wild, and it makes this difficult choice because it's so much more interesting when he can't have both, and you don't know as an audience member like which choice is right. They both seem both good and horrible at the same time because there's a power vacuum. You don't know who's going to fill it. You kind of want Paul to do that, but also it's like you really root for the Zendaya character, and morally you know she's correct, where it's like, dude, this like political marriage is so you can get revenge and become the emperor. Like, why? You had a good life before. So all of those different things coming together are like super, super interesting. And then it ends with like, oh, the houses aren't agreeing with you. He's like, well, then we go fight the houses now. And then all the fundamentalist Fremen are like, let's go. And then Zendaya just walks off like, this is crazy. And it opens up the whole sequel potential we talked about, where it's like, this is not like a definitive ending. This is like, now he's really adopting this leader role, and he's marching, he's just pushing the Fremen past their own planet to fight off planet to defeat these houses. Like, this isn't their fight, but they believe in him and they're fighting with him. So it's interesting to see how far Paul will use these people as this Messiah character, you know, like it's interesting to see.
Yeah, a couple great points there, Charles, that I'll get into as well. Not just does it end with Zendaya walking off, it ends with the final shot is Zendaya getting ready to go ride a sandworm off, and she's got this like fierce look on her face, and that is a very like interesting choice from the modern audience perspective, where it's like to have the final shot be Chani and not something to do with Paul is very telling about how they see her role in this story, and how important and central a character she is, which is a huge, as you mentioned, redemption for those of us who were concerned about the fact that all this character did in the first movie is stare with those blue eyes right into the camera. And it's really exciting that she's still staring into the camera, yes, but with a fierce look on her face, and it's the final shot as she might even be the protagonist of this story moving forward, as Paul really is kind of going to the dark side from what I can gather.
Great point. Like, there is definitely a dark streak, but you know that Timothée Chalamet, he drank the water of life, right? So there's always this glimmer of hope that at the end of this movie grabs onto, where it's like, he says he sees all the paths, and there's one in which he can get salvation. So it's like, is this him talking himself into just grasping power, or does he have an even longer term plan that will get him everything he wants? You know, you don't really know, because he's committed to this role of I need to be this guy right now to get to the next step. Is that just a permanent thing, or is this a plan within a plan, as the movie likes to say? And he says, I always love you. You know, he leaves the door open. And then he says, like, I've seen all the paths. I see the future. So how much of that is him just going down his villain arc, or how much of that is him just asking to wait and see? You don't know. And that's a great way to end this movie.
But I'll say, Charles, and this is something, the other thing I want to talk about that you brought up that I think was a great point was the aside with his mom, where he's like, okay, so half of these people see me as a Messiah figure, and half of these people are seeing me as a false prophet. And you think, having read the book and just kind of how his character seemed for the most part up to that point, you think he's like, you'd think he'd just be like, this whole thing is wacky. I'm mad about your Bene Gesserit thing. I wish none of them thought any of that about me. Like, I wish I could be just a normal Fremen, whatever. Or at that time, maybe just like, I wish I could fit in a way that we can stay safe or whatever. But instead, he's just like, okay, well, I have to make the ones that think I'm a false prophet believe I'm a Messiah as well. So it kind of changes. When you look back on that, it's like, okay, well, was everything that this guy did from that point on actually low-key, like, trying to become this Messiah figure? I don't necessarily think that, but that is a potential interpretation. I mean, it was all disingenuous from there on out.
Definitely, by that conversation, to me, was like, okay, so he does acknowledge that he is manipulating everybody in some way. He wants to get revenge on the Harkonnen, and he's like, we're so close to our plans. I just need the Fremen to do this, this, and this for me. It's like, okay, that is exactly what manipulation is. You know, you're doing the thing. Like how are different are you from Harkonnen going, we need to squeeze for profit. Like, I need to do this thing for me. Income. Yeah, such a great line. And it's just one of those things where it's like, Paul, like, I love the villain arc thing for Paul, and it's not like, because it's not necessarily villainous. It's one of those things where it's like, it's a tough choice, and then you have the Emperor going like, this is the price of power. To lead with your heart is to be weak. And at the end, when Timothée Chalamet is given that speech of like, hey guys, like, I'm the one who's kicking all the butt here. I am the one who could see the future. You need to follow me right now. And he just grips and takes power like that. And everyone's kneeling except Zendaya. You're like, whoa, he's really doing this. He's really descending into this. And he's got people all around him. He's got Gurney Halleck. He's got Stilgar. He's got his mom pushing him to do it. And once he takes the water and is like, I see the path. You don't know what path he's seeing. Like, is he seeing a path where he plays this part and comes back? Or is he just fully down that road? But you definitely have, like, Zendaya, Shani, Paul, and Jessica are almost like these three opposing forces now. It really sets an interesting stage for future movies. And the idea of ending the movie that way, I didn't see it coming. I thought it was going to be 2 and done. I wasn't anticipating a third. I mean, it makes sense, and it's also a great way to kind of defer the ending, so I have no idea where he's going to go with that either.
You know why it makes sense, Charles?
Income.
Exactly. I'm glad you. I was like, I'm gonna let him go for it.
I didn't make the connection until you asked me, but I was like, I mean, pretty much the Baron looks like any other Hollywood producer, executive type, you know, just like, make a 7th Star Wars movie.
I don't care about the quality of the movie or providing
the mermaid for live action.
Story. Yeah. Like, dude, like, Jeff Bezos thinks that the Harkonnens are the good guys. Like, when he's watching this movie, it's like, oh, wow, like, really interesting choice to kill the protagonist. To have, right? Like, Paul goes
all
in
this
and
guy was doing was making money,
right?
You know?
It's like, wow, like, bold move to have Paul, the clear antagonist, kill the Baron, the good guy. After all this, that's Jeff Bezos'.
Can I just say they cleaned that part up so good? Like, the movie had so much goofiness with the
book,
Jessica having actually giving birth to the child, Paul's sister, and this child being like 4 years old and like an adult. And then Shani and Paul have a child that immediately gets off-screen killed. And we were supposed to care at all. All that is just gone. And it's just like so much cleaner in this. There's too much to get to have to deal with all these goofy kids running around not doing anything. Cut it out. Brilliant. And then Timothée Chalamet just runs up to the Duke and to the Baron and stabs him in the neck, as part of his villain arc, as you said, Dylan, which I'm totally vibing with that villain arc for sure, for Paul, happening in front of our very eyes.
Killing the good guy.
All he was doing was trying to bring profit to shareholders. Like, come on, he had a whole utopia in his barren planet. We saw the utopia of everyone just like, living in luxury and all of that. Which those scenes were crazy, dude. That planet was nuts.
So good.
Those scenes did not have to hit as hard and be as stylistic as they had to be, like you could have even cut all of that completely, but to show that world and those planets and make them creepy and weird and different, like the fireworks looking like ink blots was awesome. The creepy looking dudes with the long hats just creepily marionetting in the background. You're like, what is going on in this planet? Everyone looking the same and like moving weird. It was creepy, dude. It was nightmare fuel for sure.
Yeah, and the decision to give more attention to Feyd-Rautha because he ends up being the fighting in the most climactic duel or battle or whatever in the book at the end. And in the book, it's just like, okay, like the nephew, the one that, and it's like the one that was known for being the schemer and not necessarily the best fighter. That's what it is in the book. It's like that's the person that's gonna fight Paul at the end. It's like Paul should kick this guy's butt. And then it's in the movie they're like, oh, let's actually make this guy the better fighter then. I mean, I have to say they did Batista dirty.
They did Batista so
they
dirty.
Did Batista
Do you think he read the script before he took the role and it's like, wait, what? I have to what now?
Part 1, I'm sure he read. Like, who knows what was done with part 2? This was years. I mean, when he's reading the script of part 1, it's probably like 2019, and now we're in 2024. Like,
film 1 already came out before they even started filming the second movie.
Yeah. So I'll say that he probably had no idea that he's going to go from being like the one of the brothers that actually was kind of the more main brother in the first movie and was in the book and seemed like in the movie like the fighter. Like, he's not as smart as Feyd-Rautha, he's not as much of a schemer, but boy can he fight. And then in the second movie he's just like running away and kissing feet.
Yeah.
Kissing feet. And then his death scene, which for no reason had to be this quick. Like, I'm sure the only person who enjoyed the extremely quick, just like stab him death of Batista's character by Gurney was probably Christian Cameron, friend of the show, who's always like, because he's a super expert in fighting and medieval warfare and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, actually, everything happens way too slow in with like all these books and movies. Like, in fact, it's usually probably much more like what happened to Batista's character, where like you get the stab. Yeah, but it was like there was no actual like fight, like clashing of swords, clashing of metal between Batista's character and Gurney's character. He just kind of kills him, and he's like, that's for the people I care about.
Like, you think of like Star Wars Episode 3, right, where Obi-Wan and Anakin fight for like 30 minutes and they're throwing lightsabers around and they're jumping off of lava and stuff, where the fight scenes in this movie are like really fast, really hand-to-hand, no effects, no flashes, no nothing, just people going boop, 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 and then it's over. And that happened multiple times. And to add on to the Dave Bautista like embarrassment, that's not even the first time he's lost to Josh Brolin. Because he lost because Brolin was Thanos, and Batista was the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, he was.
So it's like you just get spanked again by the same actor, dude. It's the embarrassment.
That's brutal.
Brutal. Yeah, Gurney
Batista
was
done
Thanos.
really dirty, unnecessarily. Like
Unnecessary.
they did not have to go
guy.
that hard in. And Fade Rotha plays very little role in the first movie, but
I don't even
he's
think
just kind of like he's in it. I think doesn't he? Isn't he? I have
no idea.
I think he goes to.
I'm sure he is.
He like goes to the Emperor's. I forget the name of her.
You saw it more recently than me.
Yeah,
defer to you.
I'm pretty sure he goes to the Emperor's like planet where he's training all those secret forces that he sends to Arrakis, and Fade Rotha is like, "We're gonna need your forces," and the guy is like, "We're powerful. Watch out." And that's pretty much like his main contribution. But in this movie, yeah, he gets so much more attention. He's shown to be a good fighter, although they're randomly just like, look, there's all these Atreides people left. You don't really know which Atreides or what's going on, but here they come. They're going to fight now, and Fade Rotha's going to beat them, and only two of them.
In the books, that was a whole thing that went on for forever. Explaining like, oh, there was a poison and there wasn't a poison, and then he switched hands, and if you only knew I'd switched hands and I switched them back, and you're like, what is all of this? This is crazy. And I didn't even think they were going to include any of it in the movie, but they did have a fun stylistic arena battle just for funsies.
Yeah,
with some characters from the first movie. But yeah, in the book, that was a whole thing, and I was like, this is a really slow part of the book. Like, I really don't care about this at all.
There's a lot of scheming.
So that was really well done.
And,
lots of scheming.
Yeah,
but speaking of
Fade
scheming...
Rotha,
go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just going to say they make him into this like creepy, formidable opponent, and he's licking knives and doing all this creepy stuff, and it's fun that it makes him more of a memorable villain. And
you think of the movie-going experience, right? Yeah. There needs to be some entertainment value to this. It can't be like Game of Thrones, it's like, oh, every character has to be morally gray and super realistic and all these things. It's like, no, you can have a character that just licks knives and kills henchmen for fun, for no warning, and just be evil, Yeah. And they even state that straight up. And that was one of the things I wanted to transition to, was to talk about just the Bene Gesserit as a whole. Because they take a totally different treatment in the movies as well, where they're just being like these master manipulators, which they technically are in the books as well. But in the books, they seem to have more of this holy mission to do the right thing by the world, kind of. Where in this, they're just kind of like, can we control him? That's all I care about. I don't care that he kills people and that he has his harem that are cannibals, as long as we could control him. And here's the embarrassment and sexuality. That's
humiliation
how we can pull it. It was like, dang, that's cold. It was humiliation and something to do with lust or something. That's how we could control him. And you're like, dang, girl, that's cold, And then the Reverend Mother's talking to Florence Pugh, and Florence Pugh's like, wait, did you plan that? And she's like, it happened, didn't it? I'm like, of course, I planned it. What, are you crazy? You think something's going to happen without me planning it? And you're just like, wow, okay. So it comes back to this theme of is there an ethical source of attaining power? Is that even possible? But then someone has to be in charge. Otherwise, bad people run away with it. So what even happens? And I thought the Bene Gesserit spin on that to being manipulators is almost like villains themselves was an interesting switch.
Yeah, and it does create this situation where it's Paul becomes the lesser of two evils. Although you could make the case that dumping Zendaya is the worst crime that anyone committed in that movie.
Come on.
Because, dude, what are you doing? But it's... but I'll also say,
when she was like, so... I'll show you, I can show you how, I was like, oh, yes. Show me everything. Where she was like, I can teach you everything or something, when he was talking about how to be a Fremen, and I was like, oh, yeah.
Charles, the most honest moment for me on the podcast, finally. What was I? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you've got the Bene Gesserit, who are kind of just all-out schemers looking for power. You've got them for some reason thinking they can control Feyd-Rautha, which I was like, that's a hard sell that you're just gonna like keep humiliating and like having sex with this guy and for him to always do whatever you want. But whatever, they've got some magic powers, they've got the voice, so right. I'll trust them. And yeah, then you've got Paul, who's like, dude, you're making some real bad despot decisions, but you're not that bad, so you're still kind of rooting for him. And then it's like, all right, we're interested to see where all this goes. You mentioned Florence Pugh's character, the princess, and she is really, I was surprised they even really had her in this, because in the books, she provides the epigraphs, basically.
Yes.
Where she,
and it's nice that they had her like keeping journals in the movie too.
She starts the movie off, and it's very similar then to like starting off a chapter in the book where she's basically describing like, oh yeah, these things happened on Arrakis and blah blah blah, and then you have her actually affiliated with the Bene Gesserit, and it puts her in this position where she's involved with all of this scheming. And actually, by the point that Paul is like, hey, I'm just going to marry you, and in the book, it's like, and you have no agency, so come over here and marry me now, because that's how you fit into all this. Hope you like books and writing, because you're going to be doing a lot of that. Yeah. Instead, they've got her in the situation where by the time that's happening in the movie, she's already decided with the Bene Gesserit, Reverend Mother, or what have you. She's like, oh, wow, the only way for our bloodline to stay in power at all is for me to find a way to marry either Paul or this wacky sociopath guy. And then she's already out there like, okay, I'm going to like go for the marriage. Like, first time that I see who the winner is and who's going to be on the throne. So it gives her, sure, is marriage not the best way to like give agency to women in our modern day? Probably not, but given the source material and where they probably are trying to go with the plot, given what they're working with, I give them props for doing the best they could. It was actually pretty inventive.
For sure. And I mean, she was, holding her own conversationally with the Bene Gesserit, and that's how we got to kind of learn more about what they're up to, was through Florence Pugh's questions and perspective. So that was a really interesting use of her character. And then, she gets to talk to the Emperor and learn what he's all about too, getting his insight and seeing how kind of passive he is at times and how like miscalculated he was and dealing with certain things and how secretive they all were and stuff like that. So it was interesting to see her in the middle of all of that, and then basically learning like, yeah, okay, my dad's failed. I'm way too new at this. There's too many bigger people in charge right now. Who knows where things could end up in the future? But she's like, oh, if you spare him, I will marry you willingly. I was like, oh, yeah, okay, interesting line there. But it's exactly what Paul Atreides wanted. So we'll have to wait and see. But no, I thought that was all like really well done. I was very impressed. And, I didn't expect there to be more sequel potential, but I'm here for it because, like you said, there's definitely going to be like this Empire Strikes Back moment now where it's like the ending was kind of sad and there's going to be a little bit more conflict before we reach a conclusion here. So who knows where it will end up, but I feel like we have a lot better character work, like a lot stronger cast of characters at the end of this than we did at the end of the book. And I'm really interested to see where they all go. This idea of Zendaya being like, yo, you were cool once, and then your quest for power made you like, unapproachable, like really gave me the ick. I had to go, as the kids say.
Oh yeah, Charles, get that ick in. That's,
oh, he called himself a messiah. That's the ick.
That gives me the ick. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't really love that expression. The expression gives me the ick. The ick gives me the ick. But I do appreciate your effort to
thank you
to reach
to connect
Gen Z, and that's what matters here. Now that we're on TikTok, we'll just cut that. We'll just cut that and throw that on TikTok. You being like, I mean, Paul Atreides at the end of Dune gives me the ick. And who knows? Maybe we'll finally go viral on TikTok.
Totally. There's a good Gen Z TikTok video in there somewhere. We'll have to figure out how to squeeze that for income somehow. Just like this is our like third Dune episode in like a month's time.
We did say that we were going to follow the Harkonnen way. And speaking of, what do you think of the way that they did the reveal of the, like, oh, you're my granddad bit in this? Like, how was it effective? Like, do we care?
I think it was interesting, right? Because you're talking about the villain arc and Paul's rise to power and being more closely related to the Harkonnens than he thought while he's doing that at the same time was interesting. Was it like this shocking reveal worth our time? Really? No. And so I'm glad that they like kind of sped through it where it's like, oh, I drank the water of life. I saw our past. Like, did you know that we were related? In the books, they knew for a long time, like from near, like pretty much halfway through. And that was a big driving force. And obviously that was a huge inspiration for Star Wars as well. So it was like a huge influential moment from the past. But now that we've like come full circle and it's like you don't want to be like have an I'm your father moment in Dune because of Star Wars, which was because of Dune, you know? So it's just like, we don't want to do that.
It'd be like, this is really derivative of Star Wars when it's like, actually Star Wars is derivative of Dune. But
yeah, but now the movie's like,
right. It's like, so you've got the book that was hugely influential, but not as anywhere near as influential as the Star Wars movies. But now so then you've got like, okay, a Dune movie that you can see the influence of the Star Wars movies on the Dune movie, like
of
very
what
clearly.
They choose to show and choose not to show also, right? So that whole thing of not making a huge deal about it, just show LeBaron like looking disinterested at a child and call it a day. You're like, okay, interesting shots there. So yeah, I was fine with it. And I think it mostly served to be like the kind of evil undertones of Paul's character are only 2 generations deep. You know, they're not even that far. You know, so it's like, is he going to go to his Harkonnen side or is he going to go to his Atreides side? That's kind of where this is, how his character's being set up. Is he's right on the edge of a knife, as in Lord of the Rings, the quest hangs on the edge of a knife. Like, which way is he going to go? Is he going to go Harkonnen power control or Atreides lead with the heart? Desert power, all that stuff. Who knows? I think I can safely assume which way it's going to go, but they're going to make you think about it for at least a movie. He's going to have some epic battles against Zendaya first. We're going to see a Zendaya Timothée Chalamet fight scene before we reach that conclusion, for sure.
That's going to be way cooler than Kylo Ren against Rey, so I'll give them that. And
yes.
It'll be interesting. I mean, you make a great point, Charles, that the Harkonnen thing very explicit or very clearly shows the influence on his choices of power. All that, like he says to his mom, "Hey, we're Harkonnens. We're gonna do this the Harkonnen way." Like there's a line that's explicitly that, and he basically goes Harkonnen. He goes full Harkonnen. You never go full Harkonnen, but he does do that.
You never go full Harkonnen. Yeah. Soon we'll know once he starts strapping himself into suspenders and like killing people for fun. That's full Harkonnen.
Yeah, that's true. If he goes black and white, if the cinematography chooses to go black and white on.
Well, apparently that planet has a black sun, and that's why it looks the way it does. I actually researched it, so.
Wow. Okay.
Just so you know. But yeah, totally.
You put me in my place there, Charles.
So it could be a genetic thing too, I'm sure. Because they said something like, even the Fremen were like, oh, that blood's no good. Like, we're not recycling that water.
Yeah.
You know, that was an interesting distinction there. I'm sure there's tons of lore as to why that is, but
right.
The Fremen who like won't even shed a tear won't recycle the water of Fremen the Fremen, the Harkonnen corpses. Yeah. So
yeah,
no,
Charles.
Yeah.
So we also had the choice of we have the mom going full Gollum over right, to where they're not Gollum vibes. Were you getting the same thing, like, independently of me saying that right now, like when you're watching the movie?
I wasn't getting those vibes, but I was like, oh, I when you said it, it makes total sense because she's like talking to herself, kind of with the rubbing the belly and all that. It wasn't. I liked the choice, you know. Like we didn't need a prophetic 4-year-old walking and talking and stabbing barons, you know. Like we just didn't need that in this movie. This movie had enough going on.
It would have been so weird. We were talking about that in the book. He's like, I was like, what are you even going to do there? And you were like, exclude it entirely. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea.
That is the one thing I learned from the adaptation of Lord of the Rings, where it's like, what are we gonna do with Tom Bombadil? This is the weirdest thing ever in this book. It makes no sense. Like you could just totally not even mention it once.
Yeah,
you know, it's true, and it's so much stronger for that. Like we don't need it. And then you have the nice parallel with that reminds me, because we know Paul killed the Baron, and then you have what's his face being like, I've killed family members before, like it's not a big deal. And so it's like, how different are you from like, he killed his mom, that's pretty hardcore, you killed your grandpa, that's hardcore, but not like, you know, you're like right on the edge there. So it just works better for the characters that we have. Like we don't need a new character who's super weird. Like we just don't need it at the 11th hour. We've got a lot to work with, you know. The layers are nice, the thematic elements of it are nice as it is.
She's coming though, Charles. Lady
She's
Jessica's
coming,
gonna have that
what's
baby.
Her face? Anna Taylor-Joy. Like she's in everything now. I was like, she was in like a million previews, trailers, things.
Yeah.
She was Princess Peach, and she's, you know, gonna be in Mad Max, and now she's the uncredited sister of Paul Atreides. It's like, man, she's doing everything.
Yeah, but I don't know if she's gonna get there in the movies to the point where she's that old. But who knows? We'll say I expect the weird toddler running around and stabbing.
They could do a flash forward. It's like flash forward 27 years, and Paul and Zendaya are now rivals.
Charles, on the topic of Baron stabbing, by the way, another important change is instead of the unceremonious, like just, oh, by the way, the Baron got killed, I believe, by Fade Rotha in the book, right?
The Baron got killed by the 4-year-old sister.
Oh, yes, he got killed by the 4-year-old sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird.
But you were like, that's kind of anticlimactic and weird, but okay.
Right, he's just kind of, yeah. And then it's unceremonious is what I was remembering. And instead it is very ceremonious and given a lot of attention in the movie. And there's just a lot of those kind of choices. It's the same thing with like, there were all these things in the latter end of the book that were very, like they were there in the text, but they were just not zoomed in on enough to be interesting. Like the idea of all these people riding sandworms into like heading toward the battle and blah blah. It's like, okay, now we have some actual fun stuff going on, and very clearly showed in the movie. So it was good fun. Also, one thing I want to mention: Rebecca Ferguson going to be playing Monza Mercato in the upcoming Best Served. Yeah, in the Best Served Cold movie based on the Joe Abercrombie books. I was thinking about that. Isn't that wacky? So she is gonna bring some real star power, especially after being in these Dune movies. So I'm looking forward to that.
And that was one of the characters, Jessica, that we really liked in the books that I thought transferred well into the movie. Like, they didn't make her as helpless in the beginning, and but they also kept up her like potential villain arc aspects too, and they showed like the progression of the tattoos and the more frequent talking to herself, to the baby, and like all this other stuff. You realized she was withholding secrets from Paul about their Harkonnen lineage, and like all this, and like she's campaigning in the South to try and build up his myth, even though he didn't ask her to, and all this other stuff, right, is still happening, which I thought, made her one of the stronger characters in the book, was that she had more of an agency and a role to play and dialogue and things to say, where that the other characters just didn't.
She was good. I mean, Rebecca Ferguson did an awesome job. Would Andy Serkis have been an even stronger casting choice? Of course, but that you could say about any role ever. And no, could you?
Because like Nutty Professor style, where he just plays every character in Dune.
It's just, I think part of the Gollumness of it, like there's the voice and also the we of it all, like speaking to in this case,
speaking like over something and being covetous,
and like a hunched sort of sense to it, and always like, we need Paul, like we need Paul, we need Paul to be the Messiah, and it's like,
and everyone else is like, no one can hear who you're talking to.
So I think it's kind of, although it is an unborn child, which it feels more living than a ring, there is this kind of like talking to a not really their animated figure that you're just like, we need this, so that was kind of weird. But Andy Serkis in a like green suit or whatever, and then just a full CGI Lady Jessica,
totally worth it.
I mean, we'll get there.
Totally worth it. One day Hollywood technology will get there, and we can have Andy Serkis play every character in every movie.
Right. Until now, there's the Hobbit audiobook that he does. He plays every character.
Now, we have the Hobbit audiobook, is true. But from there, who knows? I mean, not much I have to say. I mean, we touched on the treatment of the Fremen, which I really liked, and I thought the relationship between Paul and Chani was really much better developed in this book.
Oh yeah, there's nothing in this movie. There's nothing there in the book. Like there's just nothing. He just sees her and he's like,
I had the prophecy that we'd be
like,
together, and then they're together. Or it's like, no, Zendaya's a proud warrior who appreciates when Paul didn't, and she's also very non-fundamentalist. So when she sees Paul as all of those things too, that's what helps the relationship bond. And then they had that moment where she's like, you're horrible at sand walking, and he's like, well, I had read in my records. He's like, oh, you know what, never mind. It's just like the willingness to do that without being like super, like so many Hollywood movies would be so overly preachy about it, where it's like, oh, here's a man thinking he knows more than a woman, or here's like a white person thinking they know more than indigenous people's culture that he's in, and it just like it handles all of it, and it just lets the character work drive it, and it's just so appreciated. And already a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, you got a lot to do. Taking time for the character work and doing that without diverting from it with the over the head preachiness of anything was so appreciated, because it's all there. Like,
it is,
he is like in there thinking he's gonna just take over and do all this stuff, and like he had a lot to learn and overcome, and he had to build that relationship with half of these people. And it with them, like most of the movie takes place on Arrakis, and it works really well. The sand riding, like the first time he rides the sandworm, is such a transformative scene, and it was my favorite scene from a cinematic, just movie theaters, a guy sitting in a movie theater experience, because it was so loud. I loved it. But no, it was really great to watch them just build their relationship. And then it doesn't dwell on this crazy long embarrassing like romance scene. It's like cut to they just finished making love and they're talking about something that they thought about. You know, they don't need to have this like embarrassingly long romantic scene put to music. Like none of that stuff.
Like
it's
in
like
the room.
Yeah, like in the room. Yeah. Or like even like Star Wars would do this, like in episode 2, where they're like having these crazy scenes of romance. It's like, no. Let's cut this. And like not dwelling on having like an actual romantic scene either. Just like implying that has happened, which I thought was good that they showed that. And then like moving on to the important thing of like, hey, we're like cool, right? You don't think you're a messiah, right? And he's like, no, I would never do that. I'll love
ladies,
you always.
Don't trust your man when he says that he doesn't think he's the messiah. All right.
Yeah. It's like the fact that even comes Dune up is a red flag, okay?
Right.
Like that just should not even come up in conversation. And when he says he still loves you while he's courting a romance to the Empress, you know, it's like that's not a man, you know? It's not a man.
Yeah. I'll say, yeah, as the psych part of me says, if your man's saying he's the Messiah, please get him psychiatric help. But it's, which is probably what Paul needs as well. So that was
not a lot of therapists on Arrakis or clinical psychologists. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and what's the licensure look like? How's it transfer? Do they accept APA, American Psychological Association?
What's their standard of accreditation?
It's like,
They cut all the Mentat stuff, by the way, while I'm thinking of it, and like good riddance to that too. All those Mentat characters and side plots, like gone completely. Because there's the whole side plot of the Atreides Mentat being co-opted by the Baron and like given poison every day, or no, given an antidote. I don't remember, dude, but poison was involved as a way of coercion.
Yeah.
And somehow he was able to still work politically behind the scenes to help Paul seize power from the Emperor. Like that was a whole thing that happened that was just like gone.
I do remember
like that character was in the first movie. But not even a second of him was shown in the second movie. I'm sure they like filmed stuff and were like, dude, this movie's too long. Cut him. You know? Which kind of sucks if you're that guy. But
yeah. So, Charles, I'll also say on the relationship building stuff you're talking about between Chani and Paul, they have that awesome scene that it was almost something out of like Halo 2 that I used to play, like Halo 3. The rocket launcher and you're trying to take down the helicopter.
Oh, that scene was awesome.
You know what I'm saying? How cool was that? And that like here's the thing that's so cool about this.
They save each other's lives.
Brandon Sanderson, I think as Sanderson says in some of his writing workshop stuff, and you can find all those lectures on YouTube and all that stuff. He'll talk about how every scene should be doing more than one thing, and this is like a master class in that is that awesome rocket launcher scene where it's like
basically they're courting.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they're saving each other's lives, they're learning to trust each other. All that stuff is in the background of this incredible fight scene where she's trying to shoot down this like Dune helicopter equivalent.
It's called an ornithopter, dude.
Okay. Someone did all his research and he's very proud of that. But she's trying to shoot it down with this rocket launcher like thing, and he's stabbing people and he's
rushing off into hand-to-hand combat, which she's like, okay, that's pretty cool. And then she rocket launchers a guy at point blank range, and he's like, okay, like I might be in love. You know, it's a courtship that's happening right in front of our eyes. You know,
but it's also an amazing, entertaining action scene, which is way cooler than like some of the other choices. It's like if you make a scene that's literally just okay, now the one thing that's happening is Paul and Chani are falling in love. And it's like, that's going to be way more boring than like, oh, like you can tell they're kind of falling for each other, but there's a rocket launcher.
Yeah, but they're like in the middle of an active war zone. Yeah, fighting for their lives. No, totally. And it was super well done. And then you see her like talking to her friends off to the side and like the conversations that they have around Paul. It's like, oh, you like him, and it's like, well, he's genuine, and he doesn't believe in any of this nonsense. I don't know. The whole courting thing was really strong, and the character work for me was really strong. It moved. The pacing never kind of stuck anywhere. It was all like you said. There was subtext in every scene was packed with stuff going on. And it's that attention to the nuance and the detail of the script and the character work and the themes that I always look for and love most in movies. You see there's great movies that are just dumb, that are fun to turn your brain off and watch. But there's movies that present themselves as epic sci-fi and it's just stupid effects that were just loud and noisy for 2 hours. And then there's this, which is like, okay, really trying hard to tell a story about a dude who has to choose between the love of his life and the fate of a universe, and that kind of impossible choice. And it spends a lot of the movie contained.
Yeah, but choose Zendaya.
Choose the love of your life, obviously, right? I have a feeling he's going to be able to get both soon. But by spending that time both going down the war path and also building up that relationship at the same time, it makes that choice so hard at the end where you're like, bro, tough call there, and arguably problematic call as well.
I hope he doesn't get both.
No, they left the door open, right? Where he's like, I saw all the futures, and there's one where it works out. And he's like, no, I always loved you. Those to me are very telling things of like, I have to do this very difficult thing. I'm asking you to believe in me right now, which is also what a player would say. Let's be real. That's
right,
manipulation
exactly.
right there. But I do believe him. I believe him, though. This time, he's always so nice afterwards when he comes back. You gotta believe.
Charles, let's not bring your personal life into this. I think that it's best to...
Yes, he left off and got married, but he said he always loves me no matter what. So of course I welcome him back.
I do believe Paul that he will always love Chani and blah, blah, blah. But what I also believe is that doesn't matter when you're going to choose power over that.
Yeah, she does not have to take that, She's a strong, independent person who does not have to be part of this craziness.
Yeah. And I don't know. I hope things continue to remain as nuanced and complex as this movie did. Will Dune Part 2 end up being that second movie that ends up being the best in the trilogy, a la the original Star Wars movies? It very well might. I kind of have that feeling.
Or an Avengers kind of thing also for more modern audiences.
Modern audiences know of Star Wars, I think, Charles. Let's not... Just because you now know the phrase ick doesn't mean that people like it. You have to appeal to people.
The second movie slump, I feel like Avengers Infinity War... Well, I guess that was only two parts.
The original... Yeah, I'm saying the original Star Wars... The second movie is the best one.
Your analogy's better. You're right.
Thank you. Yes. And I mean, that's widely... You're the guy who used to do... I guess it's just on hiatus, Roger, Star Wars.
Dude, I love Empire Strikes Back. It's probably my favorite Star Wars movie, too.
You're the expert. When is Roger coming back, by the way?
Star Wars probably never. I don't know.
Oh, wow. You heard it here first. But it's... leave hope for Roger, everyone.
I said probably.
Probably probably never. Yeah. So Empire Strikes Back, best Star Wars movie in Charles's opinion.
It's up there, yeah. I'm also a bit of a prequel fan. So
what?
You're
like saying the prequels compare to Empire Strikes Back. That's a conversation worth having. We'll save that conversation for Roger upon the return. But if you were power ranking, what are you putting first?
That's a good question. I mean, Empire's obviously in the top. I don't think there's another movie that tops it Besides, I like A New Hope also. That's just a classic. And then episode 3 is amazing too. So those are probably the top 3. Choose your order.
Okay. Well, either way, I don't know if a Dune... I'm going to actually give it a quick Google if there's anything. Is a Dune Part 3 already announced?
I had no idea. I thought we were going to get like a definitive ending. I was kind of surprised that we really didn't get an answer to how he was going to resolve the love triangle. We got a deferment to a third.
Yeah. But what a deferment it was. Deferral, I think. Charles.
I mean, he did essentially choose Florence Pugh and was trying to hope to keep Zendaya in the mix.
Denis Villeneuve. How do you say it, Charles?
I have no idea. Villeneuve is French. He's French.
Okay. Well, Denis says Part 3 based on Dune Messiah. There are words on paper, according to Empire. Is that a reliable news source?
Empire, 100%. It's one of those industry magazines.
Okay, cool.
I think.
All right. Well, I have no reason to believe that won't happen. I imagine this movie will be a massive box office success. I don't know if any numbers on that are out yet or whatever, but it is exciting. The thing I was trying to say is I feel there's just something in my bones that says, like, when it's all said and done, this will be the best movie of the whatever trilogy, whatever it ends up being. But prove me wrong, Dennis. You already have shown a lot of skills taking source material and adapting it. I mean, I was thinking too, Arrival, like I read that short story earlier this year, and it's like, that's pretty impressive to be able to be like, okay, I'm going to take this short story, I'm going to blow it up to a full movie with Arrival and do an incredible job. And he's like, okay, now I'm going to take this kind of bloated old book in Dune and turn it into a massive blockbuster, like 2-part movie.
Right. And especially something that like has been tried to have been made and adapted to screen multiple times and just failed every single time. It's like, no, this time Dune is going to have its moment. It's like, wow, I keep actually pulled it off. And I think it's his attention to like which characters to focus on, which themes to change, and just like how to like have that modern movie experience all coming together in a way that no other person who's attempted to make Dune was ever able to achieve. And so it's like just a really cool movie. I mean, so obvious they're going to make a third one. I'm just surprised that they're like being so coy about it. Like, are the actors not signed on to do a third movie, dude? Like this is not going to be the end. So I don't know. They just really like starting from scratch every single time, finishing a movie and then starting the next one. It's kind of crazy. They don't usually do that anymore. I don't really understand it, but Lord of the Rings, they shot the whole trilogy at once. So,
I didn't know that. But I guess it makes sense when you consider the timeline they were coming out with and how much of a...
I could have a whole nother hour and 20-minute conversation around how Peter Jackson somehow pulled off being able to make the Lord of the Rings films the way he did, but that's another conversation for another day. But yes, he did.
I'm just thinking now, Charles, like we could do an episode on like adapting like speculative fiction, sci-fi and fantasy books to movies, what we think has gone well, what we think has not gone as well. Like there's a lot of examples of good adaptations, bad adaptations.
Tons.
It's kind of an interesting topic, especially with
Game of Thrones, Witcher, Dune, Wheel of Time, the Lord of the Rings. Just take your pick, man. There's a million.
Yeah, but then less successful adaptations like The Hobbit. Which I don't know. It's interesting, also but it is a conversation for another time. I think we've had a great conversation about a movie or two movies, Charles. I'll say we always talk about how we pitch ourselves as two friends bantering about the best in books, movies, TV shows, and more. It's like, okay, but 99% of the time we're talking about books. But Charles, we got movies in there this time, and that always feels good that we're delivering. Yeah. When will we get to the more? I don't know. Do we ever talk about more? Have we ever hit anything that isn't in the category of books, movies?
We did graphic novels. Do those count as more?
That's still kind of in the book.
That falls under more category to me. You know, like if I went to a book podcast that advertises themselves as we only talk about books, and then I see like graphic novels, I'd be like, what? It's a little bit odd. Not really a book.
Literally got novel in the phrase. Quit gatekeeping. Take that, Charles.
I'm just
now
saying.
He's got the hands up.
I'm just saying. It's to me classifies as more. We've done other stuff too. Okay, like I don't know.
Like what is it?
Things. Like we've done like over 250
like a video game?
episodes.
Have we ever done video games? Not really.
No.
That would be.
But
more.
We could if we played video games.
We do play video games, Charles. We play Fall Guys.
We do. I mean, I haven't played in a long time. I used to play video games all the time.
Yeah, it's tough, you know.
It's tough out there. Anyway, this was great. Loved Dune. Loved the adaptation. Movie was fantastic. I can't wait to come back in 2 more years when they have the third one. We'll get to read Dune Messiah.
Let's be honest, 3 more years.
3 more years. Oh, yeah, it was 3 more years. Yeah. So, looking forward to that day. And until then, guys, I think all that's left to do is play that sweet, sweet outro music. What do you say, Dylan?
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping. Charles.
Okay, everyone, thank you all one and all for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, do us a favor and go ahead and let us know over on the socials, like and comment on everything going on over there. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and TikTok and the like, and then at the FTF Podcast with number 1 at the end for Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do over on Spotify, where most of you are listening. Just click about, click where the stars are at, throw us 5 of those. It helps us so much when you do that. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That means you can say nice things about us. You can say, hey, Charles came really prepared. He knew what the Dune helicopters were called, and I appreciate that attention to detail, and that's why Charles is my favorite co-host. 5 stars.
Now I hope it's an ornithopter. Yeah, it is.
Just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you all so much for listening. You guys are great. We really appreciate you just listening. As you said, more than enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, guys, go forth and conquer, friends.